get it to Tom. If time permits, we can bring it in for consideration. Just a reminder, this started as just a District 25 forum, and then the idea was presented last week that maybe we could ask some more candidates to come, and luckily Susan was in the Sioux Falls area tonight, so she volunteered to come and give some responses from a different perspective instead of just District 25 from the government office perspective. So we thank her for coming and attending with us. The other candidates it's a busy season, so they have already committed to functions and weren't able to be here, but we do appreciate the great attendance from District 25. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Tom Wolf, and again, thank you for coming.
So we'll start out the evening with introductions, so we'll give you 2 minutes to introduce yourself as well as making some opening comments, and we'll just go down the road. So we'll start with you, Bill.
Is this on? Hello, I'm Bill Laird, and I'm a candidate for the State Senate for District 25. I was born in Aberdeen. I've lived in South Dakota most of my life. I'm a graduate of SDSU with a degree in political science and foreign languages, and I'm a veteran. I retired in 2010 after 17 years at Citibank, and I'm concerned about the direction of our state, the lack of balance and openness of state government. I did run unsuccessfully for the State House 2 years ago. Like I said, I was unsuccessful, so I'm trying again. I believe all South Dakotans should have a fair and livable minimum wage, and contrary to what a lot of people think, I don't believe that this would kill jobs. Most states where they've raised the minimum wage, it has increased. The economy is better than states where it hasn't. And if we want people to be off welfare and be less dependent on government, we need to enable them with a higher minimum wage. South Dakota has passed on an opportunity to expand Medicaid. And a minimal investment in Medicaid would bring hundreds of millions of dollars in money into our state. I believe our initial cost for the first year would have been about $3 million, and our benefit would have been close to $300 million, $270 million, something like that. What we would get from Medicaid in the first week would more than cover our initial investment. And so it's kind of a no-brainer to turn down this much money for the little investment that we would have to make in that. And of course, the cost for that Medicaid for the state will go up a little bit each year, but we're still going to get a lot more back than what we're putting into it. And this is money that goes into our economy too. This is almost $300 million into our economy. And I believe that government should be open and accountable to the people. There needs to be more transparency in our federal government. If we had more transparency in the government, I don't think we would be looking at everything we see in the paper about EB fire. And that's pretty much it for now.
All right, thank you. Now we'll move on to Mr. Ray.
You or me? Sure. Good evening. Tim Rave, State Senator, District 25. Many of you know me. I was born and raised on a farm near Dell Rapids. My wife, Lisa, and I live on an acreage near Baltic currently, and both my children now attend public universities in the state. My daughter goes to Northern, and my son is a freshman down at USD. That just makes me old, I guess. When I started this, I wasn't that old. So, you know, it's been an honor to serve as your state senator for the last 4 years. Before that, state representative for 8 years. It's been also an honor to serve in several leadership positions. I'm currently the Senate Majority Leader. And, you know, some of the things that we'll talk about later during question and answer, so I won't go into great detail now, but that position gives District 25 especially opportunities to bring our issues to the forefront, to the highest levels of government. And it's been my privilege to do that. If you honor me with your vote again, I hope to be Senate Majority Leader again and give that strong voice of District 25 back to us in the state government. So with that, I think I'll stop and wait for questions, and we'll continue on.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hunt, would like to hear from the House candidates.
Before I introduce myself, I'd like to ask, since this is an education forum, how many teachers or how many are in education in this particular group? Just raise your hand. Okay, that's to be expected. That's good. My name is Roger Hunt. I'm running for the State House from District 25. I live down in the Brandon area, a mile or two south of Brandon. I'm an attorney. Been in law business for quite a few years. I have also served in the legislature previously. I've served 18 years in the legislature. Then I was term limited out, so I sat out for 2 years as the law requires, at least in my interpretation. And now I'm running again. I have served in the House as the Speaker Pro Tem and as the Speaker of the House. I've chaired various committees, judiciary, I've sat on education, a lot of other committees, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. A lot of people have been saying, you know, do you really want to go back and do it again? And I said, yeah, I really like it because of a couple of reasons. One, South Dakota is a great state to be part of. Believe me, it's a citizens' legislature as well. We go up there and we serve for 40 days and 40 nights. We're a very biblical legislature. And we have nothing really in the way of professional legislators. They're farmers, they're ranchers, they're teachers, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're business people, and on down the list. And that's what makes serving in the South Dakota legislature a real pleasure. And I would ask for the vote of you that vote in 25, and look forward to going back. Like Tim said, I think really what we're here to do tonight, not necessarily to talk about ourselves, but listen to you, listen to your questions. And I thank you all for being here. I thank Summer and all the staff to put this together. It's a good opportunity to get together and exchange ideas. We're not going to all agree. I can tell you that right now. But nevertheless, if we don't have communication, then we're not going to take this state forward. And that's what we all want, to take South Dakota forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move over to Chris Langer.
Hi, thanks for coming tonight. Oh, wow, thanks for coming tonight. Chris Langer, most of you look very familiar and proud. Most of you have taught my children, Cole and Grant, 18 and 20 now. So born and raised on a farm between White and Toronto. So went to South Dakota State University and raised my children here, which I thoroughly love and enjoyed. So was appointed by the governor last year. So I had to jump right into the world of, I don't want to say crazy, but it is a different world. But I did enjoy it, and looking forward to serve again. Roger and I, fortunately, are unopposed, so we will be back there. We just need one person to vote for us each, and we'll be back. So thanks for having us. We want to hear what you have to say, so thanks for being here.
Great, thank you. And now we'll hear from Susan, who's a gubernatorial candidate.
Thank you very much for allowing me to participate this evening. Susan Wismer, a state legislator from way up in the northeastern corner of the state. Britain is 10 miles away from North Dakota and 1 county away from Minnesota. I'm a CPA up there. My sister and I have run a tax and bookkeeping practice up there for over 30 years. I grew up on a farm at Britain, and one of the peculiarities of that farm was that there was 4 brothers that all farmed together. So there were 15 kids that were born and raised on that farm over the course of 30 years. And another peculiarity was that of those 15 children, the first 7 were all girls. So we girls all had our farm job, and mine happened to be driving a swatter. And my young staffers, I learned after telling this story a while, I had to explain to them what a swatter was, because evidently that's not what you call it these days. When I ran for the legislature 7 years ago, members in my community probably weren't too surprised. I'm the third generation of my family to be in the state legislature. My grandfather was a rural electric pioneer, was in the state senate from the mid-50s to 1970. His name was Art Jones. Then his son, my uncle Kurt Jones, was in the legislature from 1970 to 1986. So I think all of those experiences have given me a pretty balanced perspective. And one of the themes of my campaign this year has been that we need some balance. And just like competition is good for business, or competition of ideas would be good for state government. And we essentially haven't had that for 40 years in South Dakota. And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our introductions. So we're going to begin our forum this evening with the first of two focus questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each of the focus questions, and I'll give you the order in which that you'll be receiving or answering the question. So our first focus question this evening: schools across the state are experiencing a shortage of viable candidates for teaching positions. What are the top 3 things that can be done by this legislature to address the issue of recruitment and retention of teachers in this state? And we'll start with you, Bill, and we'll work down the road.
Okay. The top 3 things that I think could be done to retain the teachers. First of all, it goes without saying almost, higher pay for teachers. Surrounding states pay better. Our trained teachers go there, and they can get anywhere, from the figures I've seen, anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 a year more. And since 2010, there have been drastic, unnecessary cuts to education in the state. This year, schools have experienced a lot of difficulty in being able to hire enough teachers. One school I read about, they were not able to hire a Spanish teacher. This is in a state where probably the second most common language is Spanish, and they were not able to hire a Spanish teacher. Those teachers are out there, but they went to other states. That's the free market out there. Okay, secondly, what we could do, don't burden teachers with programs like similar to No Child Left Behind, where they have extra paperwork to do. They have courses where they have to teach to the test. Teachers are burdened with this type of thing, and they're not free to do what they're trained to do, what they know best to do by themselves. And with these types of programs, I think there's been too much emphasis on math and science. Math and science are great, we need that, but they also need to put emphasis on the social studies too. They need to be teaching more history, geography, civics, literature, foreign languages. We need to be putting our effort and money into education, public education, to build the public education, not private schools. I don't think we should be giving discounts. A lot of people want to give discounts to people who would send their kids to private school. That's fine if they've got the money to send their kids to private school. But their first obligation, just like the state's first obligation, is to build a good public education that's as good as any private education that they could get. You get what you pay for. You wouldn't want to spend your money on cheap consumer goods. You shouldn't want to spend your money on cheap education. It's going to we need to put more money into the schools.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ray, same question, the top 3 things that can be done to address the issue of recruitment and retention.
Sure. Well, thanks, Tom. One thing I've done in 12 years of being in the legislature is try and find common sense solutions. And I'm not afraid to work with anybody, and I see several of my superintendent friends in the crowd. And working along with their group and the other education groups, I came up with what we call a high-need scholarship bill that we implemented now 2 years ago to help otherwise would not want to teach, i.e. math and science, where we currently have a severe shortage of teachers. I think the second thing is you have to be open to all ideas. I think all ideas need to be on the table, and all parties need to be able to have rational, thoughtful discussions about those ideas. And what I mean by that is giving superintendents and school boards the tools to accomplish whatever they need to do to get staff in their schools. And if that means merit pay in some schools, and I know that's a dirty word, but as I've talked about even merit pay this summer, I think one of the concerns that was brought to me was, well, we don't like to see those salaries published in the paper. Fine, I understand that. That's a problem. We can address that. I've already spoken to the Newspaper Association. They are willing to sit down and come up with a way to maybe put those, if we do some kind of merit pay, into a lump sum bucket so that it doesn't say teacher X got X amount of dollars. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but that's what I'm talking about is people coming together and coming up with creative ideas to address things. And lastly, find some ways, which we did last year and the year before, to direct extra dollars towards teacher pay. Even though the state does not set teacher pay, we directed dollars towards specifically teacher pay the last 2 years. And I know there's some proposals coming that we'll probably talk about at length a little bit later on about a 1 cent tax during the summer, etc. Again, all great ideas, worthy of discussion, but can't be afraid to talk about it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hunt, same question, top 3 things that can be done by legislature to address the issue of recruitment and retention.
Thank you, Tom. Well, there are a large, long list of reasons why teachers leave the field and take up some other occupation, do something else. We mentioned a number of them here. Pay is one. That's been a subject that the legislature has dealt with time and time again. We also have other issues that I think cause teachers to leave field of education. Some of those have been mentioned. For example, federal mandates. Of course, we can't do anything about federal mandates. We also have additional problems as far as administrative duties are concerned, which may fall into that mandate. We have testing, curriculum, class size. I've heard all of these as being reasons for people leaving the education field. I think resources is another one. Some schools we hear of can provide every student with a computer. Others do not seem to be able to do that because of financial reasons. I think that when we come to that list, if we're looking for the top 3, I think that you might even include the disciplinary factor. I know that years ago, discipline was a lot different. And I'm afraid I'm part of the crowd that maybe has caused the problem relative to discipline. Namely, I'm a lawyer, and lawyers have a tendency to sue if they have an opportunity. I think that too many lawyers don't live up to the standards, and I think as a result it's made a lot of school boards nervous. Nobody wants to put out money on attorney's fees. I think discipline is also part of issues that we're facing here. But to get back to the top 3, I think I would clearly say that, as Tim Reagan said, we've got to talk in terms of pay. We've got to be open to the discussion. And I know you hear that year after year from people, but I think the momentum is building. You people are building. You have for years. And there's going to be, I think, even greater discussion this year on pay. What the program is, what the law is to pass, I can't tell you right now. I've heard what everybody's heard. 1 cent sales tax, 3 months during the summer. And as Tim indicated, I'm sure we'll talk about that when we answer the next question. But let's go with basically pay. And I would say, to some extent, the testing classroom size is an issue. And I think that a lot of times lack of resources and the federal mandates. So I would put those lists up as what we need to deal with relative to dealing with teacher shortage in general.
All right, thank you. Chris, your comments on focus question number 1, the top 3 things for legislation to address for recruitment and retention.
You know, I really believe that the best recruitment and retention is done by the local school districts. I think that was one of the first things that I noticed talking to our legislators, just how different a school district can be from Betty Olson, we would call her the Calamity Jane of the house, because she literally she lives in Indian country or wherever she needs to have it's just a whole different world. And so to listen to what her needs are versus what a Dell Rapids needs are is just so completely different. So I think educating teachers as to where the needs are, and what I think maybe helping even our administrators, we're very fortunate and blessed in Dell Rapids that we've got so many tools as far as we live close to Sioux Falls, and our needs are going to, for recruitment is going to be very different from other parts. So I think there's a very strong indication that we need to keep that control at the local level, and legislators, we're not equipped to make those decisions for you. So I think the more that we can provide just support for you and listen to your ideas, I think that's going to help us the most. I mean, we all obviously want to give more money, but the pot is only so big at the end of the day. So I think like the others have said, if we just continue to be creative and look at those ways and somehow figure out how to show teachers that they are very important and very valued, and they are the future of our work with our children, and they are our future. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Susan, as a potential governor, how would you address the top 3 things that could be done to address the issue of recruitment and retention for teachers in the state of South Dakota?
I will start by saying that I am a member of the Legislative Planning Committee that met this summer and heard as superintendents came and talked about the issues that they were having and how we have essentially emptied the pipeline. And it was very discouraging to hear. But certainly nothing new. It's old news as far as I was concerned, and I apologize then and apologize today for a legislature that has refused so far to hear and act on what they're hearing. Number one, the tone regarding education coming from Pierre needs to change. It needs to change to one of respect, because that is not what's coming from Pierre today, whether it's second floor or third floor. And truthfully, part of the problem is that there are many legislators who are distanced from the public school system, either because they didn't have kids that participated in the public school system, they were participated in the private school system or were homeschooled. They don't send their kids to, a lot of them, even the university system. A lot of them, if you send your kids to an out-of-state school in university system, then you're just not as aware of the challenges that the in-state schools are facing. And when you go down the membership of the Senate and the House of Representatives, you'll see that there are a lot that don't have real direct ties to public education. Anyway, number one, respect for public education. Namely, and not passing the blame from the state down to local school boards. Not saying things like, oh, it's the schools that set the teachers' salaries. As far as the gubernatorial election is concerned, this election is about whether or not we value our kids enough to work to compete for them. And another way of saying that is, do we value our teachers enough to pay them? Second thing would be, something that happened during Bill Janko's administration. As all of the education rules were repealed, one of those rules that was repealed as I understand it, was the one that said that administrators, that was just, had to do evaluations, and formal evaluations. And that is coming back in again. But I think lots of bad things happened during that time. Maybe some administrators got out of the habit of doing it. There wasn't anyone saying that it had to be done. And some of the bad stories that we've gotten then over the last 10 or 20 years have been because once schools realized that they had a weak teacher, they didn't have the tools that they needed. They didn't have the paper file well enough to do what needed to be done. So I think as we, that's just one of the issues I think that has created poor relationships between the state and schools. And number 3, yes, of course, funding. The free market works. Why are we surprised that here we've been advertising ourselves as last place effort for 40 years in funding education, and we shouldn't be one bit surprised that we have finally emptied the pipeline, and it's going to take a very concerted effort, and it's going to take us a while to refill the pipeline, even once we decide to change our ways. So, respect for education, making sure that we have the tools to have the best teachers once they're on staff, and funding. Free market works.
All right, thank you. Our focus question number 2. Do you feel the state is sufficiently funding K-12 education? If not, how do you propose to increase funding? And we'll start with Chris on that one, and then we'll move to Roger, and then Susan, and Tim, and Bill.
All right. You know, we look at creative ways. Had in the past, in the year that I was there, I know Senator Ray was part of a group that helped get another 3.2 or 8% from the general budget, from what the governor had proposed that we could put into education. And I think every year it is that same climate. Legislators do really care that, we do realize that it's a problem, and do continue to look for creative ways. You know, it was interesting reading the paper with the proposed 1% tax in the summer months. I mean, I think that is, you know, definitely something that we're going to look at and see where that brings us, and just continue to have that discussion, to realize that we do have a problem. We do need to, whether it be to revisit the merit pay again, as far as being able to retain some of the harder areas to fill, if that's an answer. But obviously, your feedback and where we get our information best is going to be from you. I will say I do really appreciate our administration from Dell Rapids. I was very proud when we served here and realized how blessed we are with our administrators and how much they are respected amongst their peers. So I do feel that we are in really good hands, and I am proud of that, and I'm proud of the students that come out of Dell Rapids. I think and in this area, I think that's another thing that sometimes gets overlooked, is the quality of teachers that we get and the quality of students that come out, and how they are also having a college student now, how they are, my son is very well ready to go in math and in science and physics and chemistry, thanks to some very good teachers that we have. And so if we can continue to provide resources for them to feel that they're valued, I think that we just need to continue to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hunt?
Thank you. When we talk in terms of money, it's always going to be difficult. And the reason it's always going to be difficult is that the legislature and the government has so many demands for money from so many groups. I remember Michael saying one time, somebody asked him, well, why don't you give us some more money? And he says, well, whose rice bowl do you want us to take that money from? And that's one of the problems that we're going to face in this next session. We need roads and bridges. All of you have heard those. If you went to any of the summer meetings around, you heard how we're falling farther and farther behind. If we don't come up with money for roads and bridges, in a few years, we're going to have to pay out even more. When it comes to other needs, medical providers, nursing home personnel. Many of you probably have people that are friends, relatives that are in nursing homes. And those medical care providers want an increase in their salary too. What I'm simply saying in this is when you ask for money, there's nothing inappropriate about asking for money, but when you ask for money, have some sort of plan for where that money is going to come from. If you don't have a plan, it's going to make your job a lot easier. So let's take more funding for education. It seems to me that the biggest demand is basically for salaries for teachers. That seems to be the biggest demand. Now there's demand for other resources and school buildings, etc. But that's where we're looking, that's what probably we're looking. That probably means more and more discussion about the idea of who is going to get that pay and how are they going to get it. What's the plan going to be? And we've seen a lot of plans over the years, but that's where we need your input. Because like every other case, not every educator is going to be happy with the way that that money might get allocated. And just like the federal government does to us, the state government, I can tell you this, is going to put some strings attached to that money so it doesn't get spent for other than teacher salary and teacher pay. And what sort of a plan are we going to have to do that? I just want to make this kind of little wrap up here. When we talk in terms of pay, you also have to recognize that we have groups from around the state that say they're underpaid as well. And when you look at things, I know we're the last as far as teacher salaries is concerned, but when people come up and talk to us in here, they also tell us the fact that, hey, wait a minute, South Dakota is one of the lowest tax-paying states. You know, better to register your car in South Dakota than Minnesota. And you go down that whole list, and that's what we hear from people up in here that want money to go into their rice bowl as opposed to yours. So when we ask you questions and when you come up to testify, address those particular things. Where's the money coming from? What sort of both strings can be attached to it that both sides can live with? I know that this session, beginning in January, is going to deal with teacher pay. And I think there's probably going to be something more permanent come out of it than perhaps has been the case in the past. But I have not the slightest idea, very honestly, of what that's actually going to be. I think that credit does need to be given to the governor and to the legislature for the fact that when we had money here 2 years ago, we put it in the teacher salary pay. When we didn't have money, we didn't put additional money into it. Now that's the way to balance a budget. Let me make one final comment. Everybody wants more pay. You know one way to get more money into our system so we can have it for teachers or anything else? If people would pay the use tax that they're not paying now when they get things online. I asked the question, I'm not going to ask tonight, but how many of you file a use tax return anytime during the year to pay the sales tax that you didn't pay, then you bought something online? Now, I'm not trying to punish anybody, but I'm trying to say, we up in here, when we deal with these things, have to deal with all of these things, including things like, yeah, there's more money out there. There are millions of dollars out there, millions and millions, if people would only pay the tax that's already been imposed. I'm off my soapbox. Thank you very much.
All right. Susan, as a governor, how would you propose to increase funding for K-12 education?
There's two things. Number one, it's priorities. These last 4 years, we've prioritized a lot of things above education. In the budget cut year, we cut $127 million of general funds from the budget. By the time that year was over, I spent my entire 6 years in the legislature on the appropriations committee. By the time that budget cut year was over, we would not have had to have cut one dime, and the budget still would have been balanced. There were two major errors, misforecasts in that budget. Number one, our revenue estimates were under by more than they ever had been before. And number two, we over budgeted our Medicaid expenses. It was a scary time. There was a script written that said everybody has to share in the pain. The governor took a pay cut of $15,000 and said, education, your share's $50 million. Everybody's going to share in the pain. Well, when the year was over, we came back the next year and said, oh, things aren't quite as bad as we thought they are. We did put some money back into education and Medicaid health care. But the problem was that at the beginning, we had taken this much money from education and health care. And when we came back, we put this much more money. We only replaced it with this much when we went from here to here. And the extra funds then, the governor was free to allocate to some of his other priorities, whether it was pine beetles or railroads or you name it. All good causes, but things that were prioritized above education. To say nothing, of course, about several $1 million more in reserves. The end of that cut year, we put 40-some million into reserves that year, besides reallocating some of the cuts back to education when we realized we misbudgeted. So that's number one, priorities. We would not have had to have put money in the bank in the worst year that we had, the worst recession that we had since the 1930s. But secondly, yes, we could not solve the problem strictly by reordering by priorities. There does need to be an additional revenue stream, and legislators and the governor need to be leaders enough to lead the people in that understanding. We need to be strong enough to say, we are not being good stewards of the schools and the communities that our ancestors gave us. We need to do better. And furthermore, when I hear the talk about strings on the money, as a state that believes in local control, that's pretty frustrating to me to hear. That we don't trust our own local school boards to make those decisions. This last year, we were holding out hope that we were going to be able to do better than the 3% that what the governor had proposed. And by the time everybody got their piece, for everything from a shale underground project in Rapid City to several other Christmas tree type things that showed up on the last day, the only amount that we had left extra to put into education was something that was going to equal 0.2%. But the legislature made really sure that that 0.2%, which was $200 per teacher, had to go to the teachers. As if school boards wouldn't have done that anyway, as if school boards aren't already budgeting into deficit situations. There are a lot of red herrings that are thrown out during the legislative session to try to make excuses for why we underfund education. And one of them is the line that says, yes, the state is last in state funding. However, statewide, our total funding, when you combine federal and local and state funding, we're all the way up to 39th. So why aren't we 39th in teacher pay? And the reason we're not 39th in teacher pay is because we do maintain more small schools than New York State. But if you look at the equivalent ranking of all of the other states around us, South Dakota's at 39th, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota are all more than 10 places above us because they do value not only education, but they're small communities enough to support those schools so that they can operate them well. So, two things, priorities, and yes, admitting that we do need more money.
All right, thank you, Susan. Mr. Ray, do you feel the state is sufficiently funding K-12 education, and if not, how do you propose to increase funding?
Well, I'm not sure the question is phrased correctly. I think, I'll agree with everything that Roger said. And I think, Susan danced around it a little bit, but the only way that you're going to get more pay for teachers or education is to raise taxes. Because no one's going to take it away from Medicaid, and this year in the budget, the federal government is forcing upon us a $13 million shift, again, for Medicaid, which we touched on earlier, which is free, but it's not. And again, our share this year is an extra $13 million. We didn't have to pay that from the federal government burden. We could give that to education. Pie is only so big. And if you're going to do it, then you got to raise taxes. And I had said in my earlier statement, I'm willing to look at that 1 cent tax proposal. Rob Monson and his group and the school educator group came to me this summer and talked to me about it. I said, yeah, I think that's a good plan. I like the concept. Certainly, as Roger alluded to, details yet to be determined as we go through the session, but that's the part of the process. I could go on about budget reserves increasing, and in fact, we have school districts in this state that could operate for 2 years on their reserves without taking another penny from state or local property taxpayers. On the flip side, we also have school districts that don't have any budget reserves. So, it's unfair to criticize the legislature for not directing more money to teacher pay, but then when we give more money to teachers, then we get hammered on it. It doesn't even make sense in my head, but anyway. Education currently gets 50% of the budget. Out of what was it this year? I don't know, $4 billion. Education gets half that. And as we've already talked about, corrections gets the next, 12%, and Medicaid gets the next 35%, and there just isn't much left over. And so if you want to do anything of substance, you're going to have to raise taxes. And we'll talk about roads in a little bit, because that's one of the big issues that's going to come up. There's going to be a tax increase with the road stuff. And it's going to be gas, and it's going to be excise, and could potentially be a sales tax. And so now we're talking about 8% sales tax during the part of the summer. So those are good conversations to have. Those are great debates and discussions to have. But you got to be open and honest about it and say, we're going to be paying 8% tax. Okay, well, if everybody's okay with that, that's fine. As we all remember, the last election, we had a $180 million increase to fund education and Medicaid, or health care, and it failed. And it was polling about the same, coincidentally, prior to the election than the 1 cent plan that I think Kello posted it today. It was polling about 62%. That was polling for that 1 cent ballot initiative 2 years ago, and we all remember it died. So, I don't know what that means necessarily, except that I think people maybe say one thing on a poll and will obviously go to the ballot box and do something different. But again, I'll go right back to where I started. All ideas have to be on the table. People have to come and be thoughtful and reasonable, and we put lots of good ideas together and come up with a way to move forward.
All right, thank you. Bill, do you feel the state is sufficiently funding K-12 education, and if not, how do you propose increased funding?
No, I don't think they're sufficiently funding it. And to increase the funding, first of all, you don't cut funding to education. What they've done, they shouldn't have done it in the first place. It didn't really have to be done. Another thing, I was not aware of this, but I read it in the paper today too, about this new proposed penny sales tax. And it kind of surprised me. It looked like most people would go along with it, which is one way to do it. And I think, from what I remember, it was set up to be imposed in the summer, which I guess they would be taking advantage of the tourism going through, getting money from people passing through the state, which is a good idea, if we have to do that. We don't necessarily have to do that, but I'm sure if something like that came along, it would have to go on the ballot, and it would be up to the voters. Another way to increase funding is use one-time found money for education. It's called one-time money, but I know for at least the last 2 years, they've come up with one-time money. And there was a lot of it. It wasn't just a little bit, it was a lot. They could be putting that toward education, or a lot of it toward education. It could make a big difference. Another thing, the reserves that the state holds. The state holds reserves. They're in excess of what they're required to hold. And it's supposed to be used for a rainy day. This is our rainy day. This is something that needs to be used, and especially if you're holding twice as much in reserve as what you're required to hold or recommended to hold, you can go into that also, and that should be put toward education. Other things, this is something, I don't know if I get any money from this or not, but it's something to be looked at because it's something that's going on in the state. There's a gentleman that started his own business. He used to work in the state government, and he started his own loan company with paper corporations in the Caribbean. And what I've read recently is just in 2009 alone, and this needs to be investigated more, certainly, but in 2009 alone, he received $13 million in loan fees. Now, I've heard figures, when people talk about the loan fees, I've heard everything from $13 million to $144 million. I don't know which is true. We don't really know if it's there, but it could be there and it could be ours, because they say he did not have the authority to do this. Those loan fees could have been paid to the state of South Dakota. That's funding there that could go to education. Another thing that I think about from time to time, it's something that's stuck in my craw, and I think other people's craw. Back when they were pushing legalized gambling in South Dakota, the lottery and the video lottery, one of the things that they touted to everybody was this extra money is going to go to education. A lot of people said this is how they got the little old ladies to vote for it, because this would be a good thing. It would go to education. Well, it did, but then they used that to relieve property taxes. So they took away revenue that would have gone to schools anyway. So this still sticks in my craw. I think other people may feel the same way. But there is money there. It's not that we're destitute. There's money there to go toward education, and it needs to be.
All right, thank you, Bill. Those were our two main focus questions. We'll go on to some solicited questions that were sent in, and we'll limit it to just 1 minute responses to the final questions here. First one, it said, would you support or oppose a bill that would have all South Dakota schools start after Labor Day? And we'll start with Susan on that issue.
I'm not settled on that. It would be nice not to have to start until after Labor Day. I'm a 4-H parent. I get all of those things. But I also remember that we've been through this before. The population voted to start it after Labor Day, and they got the legislature convinced that to repeal it. So I have never sat through an associated High School Activities Association meeting and heard all the pros and cons and what it does to sports seasons and academics. It's not really one of my big things. I'm not enough of an expert at it. I'd have to hear both sides again.
Okay, thank you. Bill, how about you?
Yes, absolutely. It should have been left the way it was. Memorial Day, Labor Day, that's after summer vacation. And put the start after Labor Day, because you have those longer holiday weekends. This is the end of the summer. Families look at this. This is a good time for families to have maybe a 3-day summer getaway just before the end of summer and going back to school. Traditionally, it's been that way. There's no reason not to have it that way. Some people say, well, if we do that, then they have to take their semester test 2 weeks after Christmas vacation, or right after Christmas vacation. They'll forget everything they learned. They won't be able to take the test. Well, if they were taught right, it wouldn't make that much difference. I mean, I went through that, and most of us, I think, here went through that. That's the way it was. Other people say, well, they started making the last day of school earlier and earlier and earlier because they were trying to get ahead of the rush for summer jobs. Well, it doesn't work that way. You just keep leapfrogging over each other. It's just time to stop the nonsense. set it here, that's summer vacation. You got those two important summer vacations, holidays in that same period, and that's it.
All right, Mr. Ray.
Well, I did spend a lot of time with my superintendent friends on this one. You know, it's a local issue, and, you know, the biggest problem is the way that we currently have the system set up with our athletics and the integration of that and testing and the importance of student retention, memory retention of that, those subject material. It's a local issue. It's not for the legislature to deal with. So I guess they can decide as local how they want to do it, and it'll all wash out at the end.
All right, Roger.
Tim used the word dabble, and believe me, that's probably very true. I voted on this issue when I've been up in the legislature at least 3, if not 4 different times. And it doesn't seem like we can please enough people so that we settle it once and for all. I personally don't have an order either on here, either before or after, but it seems to me, given all the extracurricular activities and everything else that the school's involved in, it's probably going to continue to be, school will probably continue to start before Labor Day. The question is, how close to Labor Day can you push it in an attempt to try to please the majority of the people?
All right, and Chris, your feelings on this?
I would agree, excuse me, I would agree too. It's a local control issue. I think each area probably has their own opinions on obviously it's been done in other states, but it's hard as a legislator to demand that all school districts follow the same pattern. I think, as Roger said, if we can just get to a compromise that everybody can live with, I think that's the way to go.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to our second solicited question then. A point of controversy in some South Dakota schools last year surrounded around the state-mandated assessment. Do you believe that parents should have the right to have their children refuse to take the tests, or should taking these assessments be required in order for a child to receive a free public education? We'll start with you, Chris.
I know there was lots of talk about that. I think it really puts a big burden on our teachers and our administrators when students do not have to take that assessment. I think they're used for very good purposes. I know there was some talk about privacy in the data, and I believe that is not true, that our children are not, that is not a risk for them. I think to allow a parent to come in and say, I don't want my child to take that assessment is just placing an extra burden on the teacher. I think those are all put in place for us to get some good information and some good data, and not meant to harm students in any way. So I would support not letting them allowed to be opt out of that.
Thank you. Roger, your feelings on this issue?
I would probably tend to agree with what Chris just said here. You know, education is all about testing. You've got to somehow, in today's society, you've got to quantitate everything. There used to be a time when you just had, in many school districts, you had fail, pass, and that was it. Now we look at GPAs, we look at all kinds of testing, and while I think we can overdo having the teachers and the school systems involved in the testing, I think that some amount of that has to be done. And when you start allowing the parents to dictate, you know, what the grading system is, if you will, what the assessment system is, I have a little problem with that. I think parents have to be involved. I think parents need to know what their students are doing so that students can receive the benefits from training in the home and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is that there has to be some sort of evaluation done, whether we call it assessment or we call it something else. That's what education, in my opinion, is best benefited by. So let the education system know accomplishing what they intend to accomplish. And you have to have some degree of testing.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ray, your feelings on this issue?
Yeah, I think with some of the safeguards we put in last year on protecting personal data, I don't see any reason to have the ability to opt out of those tests, although and Roger touched on it, you know, it's all about And I believe if most parents were educated on the process and what is going on, I don't think you'd have, there's really not that big of a push to pull them out of those tests. And, you know, both my kids went to Tri-Valley School, and, you know, they took those tests or those types of tests. And, you know, my wife and I were both involved in the process and understood the public school system, so we never had any concerns or fears. And I think a lot of it was just educating parents as well. So, no, I'm not supportive of that. I obviously am supportive of protecting children's private data and personal data, et cetera, but I think most of the safeguards are put in place for that now, and I don't see any reason to opt out.
All right, thank you. How about Bill, your feelings on this?
Okay, well, I guess the way I feel, like Tim said, you know, private personal data is protected, which it should be. There shouldn't be anything like that included in it. Assessment to see how good a student may do at school, or you know, what they're suited for, that's fine. But to tie this to, you know, he has to be assessed or he can't get a free public education, if that's the way I understood the question, absolutely not. You get a free public education regardless. And if your parents refuse to let you, to let the kid be assessed, well, you have to find another way to handle it. You can't tell the kid he can't get a free public education. I do everything I can to make sure to encourage people to let their children be assessed. I guess I don't know how they would be able to opt out of being tested. You're tested all the time. I guess this type of assessment that they're talking about is before the hearing, where usually you take a test after you receive the lesson. So I could say no. You can't take away their right to have a free public education regardless.
All right, and Susan, I might restate the question again. The controversy in some of the South Dakota schools last year surrounded around the state mandated assessments. Do you believe that parents should have the right to have their children refuse to take these tests, or should taking these assessments be required in order for them to receive free public education?
I took Iowa basic tests, and I never knew any parent that came to the school and said, I don't want my kids taking these tests, and I don't see any reason for the answer to be any different today.
All right. And our final question for the evening, while the main focus of the forum tonight has been on educational issues, at this time we'll allow the candidates 3 minutes to address any non-educational issues that they wish to address. So we'll start with Bill. Again, the non-educational issues, any items that you would like to address, and we'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay, well, yes, I could think of one. And I guess I'll be the one to bring up EB5. The legislature needs to see that this is fully investigated. There may be nothing going on there that's wrong, but it needs to be investigated. If there was nothing there that was shady, if the principals involved had come out and revealed everything 10, 12 months ago when this started, and there was nothing there for anybody to be ashamed of, nobody was doing anything they weren't supposed to, by this time, most of the voters would have forgotten almost everything about it, and it wouldn't even be an issue now. Veteran politicians know this. They know how voters are, but they haven't done it. They're still hanging on, hanging back, I think, waiting for the election to pass before everything comes out. And it's just like Dan Rather, the first one I ever heard say it. He said, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. If it's not a duck, demonstrate it. Show us that it's not, that there's not something going on. And that's essentially where I feel.
Yeah, Roger touched on it, and I talked a little bit about it earlier. It's going to be road funding, will be, there's always something that pops up that nobody knows is going to be a big deal. Road funding is going to come up, and it's going to be a big deal. Some of the summer study numbers right now, and that's what I'll call the platinum package of maintaining roads and bridges, is $143 million of increased taxes next year, ongoing. That would be ongoing. I think there'll be, again, a plan that will be found somewhere less than $143 million a year. To put that in perspective, a penny increase in the gas tax will get you about $6 million a year. So I'm pretty sure there's not a lot of support for about a 30-cent a gallon gas tax increase. You can see a lot of heads nodding, but I think it's going to be a package of increased excise tax, gas tax, and probably some other tax increase to try and come to that number. We're going to have to do something. The federal government's share of road funding is going down. Our roads need to be maintained. And so we're going to have to do something. I think what that plan looks like is probably different than the plan they just proposed or are proposing in the summer study committee currently. But that will engulf the study session. All right.
Roger, any items that you'd like to address that are non-educational issues?
Maybe a couple. One, I just have to agree wholeheartedly with Tim Ray's with regards to roads and bridges. I don't know if any of you went to any of the 6 or 7 statewide meetings that were held on this subject over the summer. But if you didn't, you missed out on some good information. For example, we have in the vicinity of 4,500 bridges in the state of South Dakota. 4,500. We have, enough miles of roadway in South Dakota to go around the world 3.5 times. I mean, these are some big numbers that we don't always hear about, but if you start multiplying the cost of making the repairs to those, roads that are in good shape, roads that are in poor shape, bad shape, there's going to have to be some money saved. And currently, the 5-legged stool for funding roads and highways is federal funding, vehicle excise tax, county wheel tax, motor fuel tax, vehicle license fees. My question to you is, which one of those would you like to have increased? Because it's quite likely something there is going to have to be done. Another thing, I just want to get back to the EV5. I know I probably shouldn't throw out a rebuttal, but how long? A few months ago, the Argus leader said that South Dakota reportedly is one of the most corrupt states in the United States, and they gave a high percentage of corruption in South Dakota. If you actually did the math on that, South Dakota state employees number about 13,000 people. And if you did the math for that percentage, that meant over a 10-year period, out of 13,000 people, there was one who did something corrupt. Now, the point I'm seeking to make is, we're talking a lot about the EV5 right now. It's politics. It's that time of the season. But don't be misled by things. Wait until after 4 November and see if this issue still goes. There have been several investigations. And I just want to put to your mind that South Dakota is not a corrupt state. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you. And Chris, any non-educational issues you'd like to address tonight?
I think we'll see some additional legislation from Jolene's task force. Is an interim study that's going on right now dealing with some domestic violence issues, how we treat those under the law. There's also some juvenile justice reform studies that's going on as far as we worked with some adult reform in the past, last year, so it's looking at that as well, so those would be a couple other items. And once we get out there, there's always several more that come up that I'm sure we'll get to as well. It should be a busy year.
All right, thank you. And finally, Susan, any non-educational issues you'd like to address this evening?
Yeah, just a couple here. Remembering that the minimum wage issue will be on the ballot, and there was, it appears that there is enough support to pass that. However, any advocates for the minimum wage need to be aware that, well, the business lobbyists have determined that they're going to keep their powder dry until the legislative session. But they plan to come to the legislative session and change that, and lobby for changes to that minimum wage increase. They do not like the cost of living increase, and they do not like the portion of it that says that an employer has to pay $4 an hour of the cost of a food service employee. And so they'll be lobbying to change those two provisions. So anyone who, I definitely believe that minimum wage ought to maintain its purchasing power, just like Social Security benefits go up and several other types of compensation go up with the cost of living formula. And if we don't get some balance in Pierre, either in the governor's chair or in the legislature, we may very well lose some of the minimum wage improvements that look like they'll be passed at the ballot next week. Secondly, got to just touch on Medicaid expansion a little bit. $5 million a week investment in our healthcare institutions in this state for every week that this governor refuses to fill out the paperwork to apply for Medicaid expansion. 48,000 people, actually 26,000 people who are under 100% of the poverty level, who have no access to health care today, preventive health care, of course emergency room care, the very most inefficient type of care they have access to. Crazy that we're sitting out here. The governor acknowledged just the other night in the debate that yes, this is now the law of the land, but South Dakota is sitting here trying to pretend that the Affordable Care Act is not here to stay. And it's costing our economy millions and millions of dollars, and costing thousands of people the peace of mind that would come with health care. I really think that, there's a lot of focus on able-bodied adults and not giving them something that they ought to be able to get on their own. But if you really studied this population, you would see that a lot of people have chronic health conditions that because they are untreated, they can't participate in the workforce to the degree necessary to have health coverage at their job. And also many, either, that maybe they don't meet the definition for Social Security disability, but they're physically or mentally impaired to the point that they also cannot maintain enough of a job that allows them to have health care with their job. And I really think that's a terrible decision on the part of this state. And number three, just as in my campaign also, open government is not going to really come to this state until we have a little more balance in Pierre. These days, the legislature tells the cities and the counties and the schools, you have to conduct all of your business out in the open. But in Pierre, any decision of any import is made behind closed doors, whether it's in the closed governor's conference room or in the closed Republican caucuses or in the closed pre-committee committee meetings, where noses are counted and permission is parceled out to vote in accordance with the administration's agenda. And that won't change until we get some balance back in Pierre.
All right, thank you. That kind of concludes our questions, so I will give each candidate 3 minutes to make some closing comments. And so we'll start with Chris.
I guess just because it's fresh in my mind, I would do a little rebuttal to Representative Woodsburg's comments there. I don't believe that. I don't believe that are made. I think we do a great job of open government, and everybody is heard. I think the process works. I think I've learned a lot. I think by the time a bill is fully passed and fully implemented, it has had its fair share of debate and concern, and I do believe in our process. I also believe that the governor has really looked at the Medicaid expansion, and as it is unfolded, I think my understanding is 10 years from now, the state of South Dakota will be looking at a $34 million bill that we cannot afford. So I think there's a lot of misinformation that goes along with that, and I think our governor is doing a great job as far as what needs to be done in the state of South Dakota, and there's a very small population of people that are not served by our health care. It's not as big as what people would think, and I do believe that we are using our dollars the best that we can, and our state is run very efficiently.
All right, thank you, Chris. Roger, closing comments from you.
Thank you, Tom, and once again, thanks for all of you for coming, and we're all going to probably stick around here over by our tables, so please come on by.
I have free shirts, yeah.
Yeah, free shirts over on that table, free candy on my table.
Yeah, mine too, please.
Anyway, since this is an education forum, I pulled the stats, the general stats of the Secretary of Education's office for both Dell Rapids and Brandon. And you know, when you look at these stats, especially accomplishment type stuff, you know, Brandon Valley's dropout rate is 0.1%. The Dell Rapids dropout rate is 0.7%. Del Rapids, as far as school attendance or district attendance, is 96.2. Brandon is 96.2. High school completion rate for Brandon is 98.85, and for Del Rapids is 95.95. I mean, those are terrific numbers. And I know that it seems many times that we're not really fully appreciative up in Pierre of everything that the educators do in the state. And I know it seems like we're just giving them a tough time all the time about pay and money and funding and whatnot. But every legislator I know up there would basically stand proud of those kind of facts and wants to basically resolve this pay and funding area, at least pay for teachers area. You know, as an attorney, I have a lot of people that come into my office and they are mad. They're mad about this or they're mad about that. And they want to sue. And they want to hire me to sue that so-and-so because he did something that wasn't fair. And I say, okay, let's talk about the case a little bit. And I said, what are the facts about the case? And the facts are laid out. And I said, well, you know, there's another side to that story, apparently, that you're telling me. And you want me to sue, but are you willing to put in long hours? Are you willing to go through all of these trials and tribulations of going to hearings and so on and so forth? And after a while, about an hour and a half later, they kind of walk out of the office saying, well, I don't know if I want to sue or not, because I brought reality into their life. My comments tonight, very honestly, on a lot of the education issues, are simply to bring in reality into this discussion. It doesn't mean by any measure at all that just as I would represent that client that walked into my office, I'm not going to represent all the interests that are evidenced in this room tonight. I can't represent all of them all the time. Ask my superintendent down in Brandon, Dave Pacone. He and I talk a lot on the phone, and he will give me his viewpoint. I'll call him and ask him for his viewpoint. And as Tim Ray said, you know, you put everything out on the table and you try to work through it. And that's what I'm sure that we're going to try to do for you up in Pierre. One last factor. I wish more of you could come to Pierre and sit in on committee meetings. One of the deficiencies of our system in Pierre is we're only up there 40 days and 40 nights. Now, most people clap at that we're only up there that time. But the problem is that means so many times you probably have 24 hours notice about a bill being heard in committee. That's why you have lobbyists. And that's why I encourage you to have lobbyists, because lobbyists in South Dakota are a whole lot different than the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I depend upon lobbyists for input. I say, what's your side of the story? I'll go to another lobbyist and say, what's your side of the story? And between the two, I end up getting a pretty good idea of what's going on. So come to Pier, voice it up there, make sure your lobbyists are working for you, and I'm sure they are. Thanks.
Thank you. Susan, closing comments from you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity again. Sometimes I wish that life wasn't so complicated, and that sometimes we get so frustrated with federal issues, and we forget what issues are decided in Pier versus what issues are decided in Washington, D.C. And right now, in my race, with the Senate race is sucking a lot of the air out of the room, and if I could do anything, it would be to say, remember that these elections, not only the gubernatorial elections, but the legislative elections, really affect your life more than the federal elections do. Decisions that are made in Pier affect our community so much. They affect how much we value our education system. And that's too general a statement. We could say that these elections are about how much we pay our teachers and how much we pay our nurses' aides, because those decisions are made in Pier. How much we fund Medicaid and how much we fund education, those decisions are made in Pier, and those institutions are so important to our communities. And so as we head into this final week here, I hope that you can help spread the word that state elections are so important, and don't let people tune out of politics because they're so frustrated with the fact that nothing happens in D.C. I talked about how I drove a swather on the farm, and when I go down the field, sometimes when you have a sickle section that's broken, you'll have a green line behind you for just as long as you refuse to get off that machine and fix the swather. Well, sometimes I draw a parallel between that and what we're doing or not doing in Pier. I really feel like we're starving our schools, and we've got nearly bankrupt nursing homes and crumbling roads and bridges. And those things aren't fun to talk about. But just because we don't talk about that damage doesn't mean the damage isn't there. It needs to be addressed in all of those areas. And just like that sickle section, until I get off and fix it, until we stop and acknowledge the challenges that South Dakota has and say, yes, we are going to lead, we are going to address the challenges that South Dakota has, things aren't going to change for us. Appreciate very much, again, the opportunity. I hope I have a chance to visit with some of you afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Tim Ray, closing comments from you.
Well, Tom, thanks for hosting, mediating tonight, Summer and Darren at school, thanks for hosting us. I've devoted, interestingly, most of my life to public service. I love it. I've been a paramedic for over 20 years. I've been doing this for 12 years. And, as I said in the paper the other day, I love helping people. That's just what I like to do. Not always fun, but I like doing it. I get it. My kids went to public school, and my kids are both in South Dakota universities, and we're paying the bill for that. We're certainly not independently wealthy. So, what I have been proud of as a legislator is working with folks like Mike and Bob. And Bob and I worked on some pretty heady stuff on some school athletic activities, association issues, and working together, we were able to make some, I think, positive changes. And I know Mike and Bob, and I know Guy won't be, it's his first year at Garrettson, but aren't afraid to call me. Tom was never afraid to call me. I'm always open to talking and looking to find solutions. And as Roger alluded to about your lobbyists, you know, it's lobbyist is not a dirty word, and to have a conversation with your lobbyists or your representatives is what they are for your particular groups. Behind closed doors in a private conversation is a good thing because they bring your issues to the forefront. So all of us who have to be experts on everything from education to railroads, the first year you go out there and figure out how to spend a finite amount of money, you know, I think that's a good point. It's not Roger, Tim, it's not our money, it's all of our money. And as much as we want to send a peer, whoever is elected, they'll spend it. If you keep sending more, they'll spend it. So, you know, it's all of your money, and you just have to decide as a group, as a state, we have to decide how much we want to bring to peer, how much we're willing of our money to give up to get spent back out again. And right now, we have a finite amount, and we try and spend it the best we can. So, with that, thanks for coming, and I look forward to visiting with you.
Thank you, Tim. And Bill, final comments from you.
Okay. One of the things I've been asked about when I've been interviewed before is what would we do or what can we do as legislators for economic development in South Dakota? Specifically, what can we do for economic development in small towns? Well, essentially, economic development in small towns, the basis for that is the same as it is for the state. It's education. Essentially, for small towns, there are two things that small towns stand on. Agriculture, which supports a small town. You have to work to support family farmers. This will support small towns. And also small towns are bedroom communities, where you have commuters who live in medium-sized towns, somewhat larger towns, a distance away, who have jobs where industry and businesses come in. And the way to get business and industry to come in is education. That's the foundation of economics. You need a well-trained workforce. Well-trained through strong math and science in the schools. You need an enlightened workforce. People, you need to create a workforce that's enlightened. The students that have a strong base in history, civics, geography, literature. These are the things that build good citizens. Math and science can make good workers. The other things, social sciences, will build good citizens who can make judgments when it comes time for them to vote, decide who should be running their government and maybe who shouldn't. And then I thank you for the Dell School for having us here. It gives us an opportunity. And that's about it.
All right, thank you. We'll now call upon Superintendent Schultz for some closing comments.
Well, first, I just want to thank the five of you. We're obviously probably a pretty biased group to be walking into, knowing it's an education forum. And as you saw, most of us in the room are educators. So I thank you for coming. And two of you, this is your second trip here. And so we didn't scare you off too much the first time. But just a couple quick things. The Del Rapids polling place for the election is the Lutheran Church. And we did print off sample ballots, so if you're a District 25 voter and want to grab a sample ballot, they're backed by our government students there who are ready to give you one and a treat if you're getting hungry and maybe missed supper. That is about it. I wanted to thank Big Sioux Media for coming. This is, Matt, am I correct? You're going to keep it on there as a webcast? So if you want to rewatch the forum, you sure can, or spread the word to those who missed it. But stick around so these folks can meet you and you can talk with them. We'll stay as long as you need us to. So again, thank